Drinking alcohol, smoking, and drug use are harmful to health.
It was the kind of small-town legend that clung to the edges of conversation like smoke from a dying fire, whispered in diners over cooling coffee, murmured in school hallways by kids, daring each other to say the name aloud. The Sodder House, December 24, 1945. 5 kids gone in a blaze that swallowed their family's Christmas Eve dreams. No bodies, no bones, just questions that festered for decades, turning a tragedy into something darker, something that pulled at the threads of reality until you wondered if the fire had taken more than flesh and wood. I first heard the full story in the summer of 2012, during one of those aimless road trips you take when you're 22 and convinced the world owes you answers. My buddy Jake and I were chasing ghost stories across West Virginia, the kind that promised chills without the commitment of real fear. We'd hit the Mothman statue in Point Pleasant, laughed off the flattened grass circles in the hills, and now we were zeroing in on Fayetteville, the Sodder place, or what was left of it. 5 kids, Marion, Sylvia, George Jr., Louis, and Maurice. Just poof, Jake said, squinting at his phone as he drove our beat-up Civic down Route 19. The screen glowed with grainy black and white photos, a sturdy 2-story house before the fire, its porch strung with holiday lights, the family's Christmas tree half visible through a window, and then the aftermath, a charred skeleton of beams jutting like broken ribs against a snowy dawn. Fire starts around 1 a.m. Parents wake up to flames everywhere. They get 4 kids out, 2 older ones and the baby. But these 5? Vanished. No remains in the rubble. Cops said the fire was too hot, burned everything to dust. But get this, the dad, George Sodder, he was convinced it was arson. Said someone cut the phone lines, sabotaged the water pumps. Even thought the kids were kidnapped, sold off, or something worse. I leaned back, the humid air thick through the cracked window. Creepy as hell. But that's old news. Why is it still a mystery? Jake grinned, that reckless spark in his eye. Because people swear they've seen him. Kids in old-timey clothes, wandering the woods near the old lot. Hikers report flashes of light at night, like fireflies but bigger. And the house? It burned down, sure, but the foundation's still there. Overgrown, forgotten. Private property. But who's gonna stop you from peeking? We arrived as the sun dipped low, painting the Appalachian ridges in bloody orange. The lot was on the outskirts, tucked behind a bend in the road, where the pavement gave way to gravel scarred by ruts. A chain-link fence sagged around it, topped with rusted barbed wire that whispered threats in the breeze. No signs, no warnings, just weeds choking what used to be a driveway. And in the center, the concrete slab of the foundation, cracked and heaved like an unearthed grave. Charred timbers poked up here and there, blackened relics half buried in ivy. We parked a quarter-mile back, flashlights in hand, hearts pounding with that stupid thrill of the forbidden. Just a quick look, Jake said, clipping the fence with bolt cutters he'd borrowed from his uncle's garage. The snip echoed too loud, and I froze, scanning the tree line. Nothing but cicadas screaming their endless dirge. Inside the fence, the air changed. It was cooler, heavier, like stepping into a walk-in freezer, laced with the faint, acrid tang of old smoke. The foundation formed a rough rectangle, maybe 30 by 40 feet, its edges softened by decades of soil and neglect. We picked our way across, boots crunching on brittle glass shards that caught the last light like tiny embers. Jake shone his beam over the slab, tracing faint outlines where walls once stood. "Check this out," he whispered, kneeling by a corner. Etched into the concrete, barely visible under moss, were initials, GS plus MS, 1940. George and his wife Jenny, probably, marking their new home. But as I crouched beside him, my light caught something else. A small handprint-sized depression, fingers splayed as if a child had pressed their palm there in wet cement, long before the fire. The edges were too clean, too recent, like it had been carved yesterday. A chill wormed up my spine. "Wind," I muttered, but my voice sounded thin. We pressed on, circling the perimeter. The sun vanished fully now, stars pricking the sky like accusations. Jake started snapping photos, his phone's shutter clicking like dry bones. "For the blog," he said. "Urban explorers eat this shit up." That's when I heard it. A soft rustle, like fabric brushing leaves, from the far side of the slab. I swung my light. Nothing. Just shadows pooling in the foundation's hollows. "You hear that?" Jake paused, head cocked. "Probably a raccoon, or your imagination." But his laugh was forced, and we both knew it. Stories online mentioned echoes, faint cries on windy nights, the patter of small feet. Bullshit, we'd told ourselves. Atmospheric tricks, grief manifesting as hallucination. We decided to set up for a bit, the real trespassers' rush kicking in. Jake unrolled a thin blanket on the slab's edge, cracking open a couple of warm beers from the cooler. "To the ghosts," he toasted, clinking cans. The whiskey stung as it slid down, easing the tension in my stomach. We spoke to break the quiet, about jobs we despised, women we'd ditched, ambitions we'd abandoned. But the darkness closed in, and soon our conversation faded, consumed by the forest. It began subtly. Around midnight, my phone vibrated, a low battery alert, despite being fully charged that morning. Jake's phone did the same. No reception, naturally. We were far from civilization. Then the odors hit. Not just the lingering smoke, but something sweeter, like sap mixed with toffee. Freshly baked cookies, perhaps. Absurd, but it lingered in the air, sickly and off. I stood to relieve myself by a tree, stepping away from the concrete. That's when I noticed the glows. Not fireflies. Too constant, too intentional. Tiny specks swaying at the forest's edge. 5 of them, drifting like candles carried by invisible figures. They pulsed together, forming a rough arc, as if observing us. "Jake," I whispered, pulse racing. "Look." He jumped up, flashlight cutting through the night. The glows vanished, but in their place, a figure lingered, a small, slender outline, slipping behind a tree, childlike. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. We shouted, voices faltering. "Hey, who's out there?" Silence, heavy as pitch. Then, faintly, giggles. Not malicious, not taunting, pure, playful, like children at a game. But it resonated strangely, layered, as if rising from within the concrete itself. We rushed back to the foundation, standing back to back, beams darting frantically. The air grew hotter, unnaturally so, carrying that cookie scent, now mixed with something acrid, burning plastic, scorched hair. Sweat dripped down my face despite the cold. Jake's face was ashen, eyes huge. "We need to leave. This isn't funny anymore." But as we gathered our stuff, a groan pierced the night, like wood creaking under pressure. Except there was no wood. The concrete rumbled again, louder, and fractures spread outward from that tiny handprint. Dust billowed, caught in our lights. And then, footprints. Small, bare, forming in the dust, as if rising from below. 1, 2, 3, encircling us, quiet and purposeful. Fear gripped me. I dropped my flashlight, scrambling for the fence, but Jake clutched my arm. "Hold on, listen." A murmur now, barely audible, like a breeze. "Help us." Multiple voices, childish, overlapping, pleading. Not hostile, urgent, as if they'd been crying out for decades and finally found someone to hear. We fled. Barbed wire tore at my jeans, drawing blood, but I didn't pause. Branches lashed our faces as we tore through the undergrowth, chests heaving, the giggles pursuing us, fading, then surging, then gone. We reached the car, tires kicking up dirt as we sped off, silent until the town's lights appeared on the horizon. Back in the motel, doors bolted, we replayed it 100 times. "Mass hysteria," Jake insisted, scrolling blurry photos on his phone. But even he faltered when we saw them. 5 faint orbs in the frame, clustered around the handprint. And in one shot, unmistakable, a row of small faces peering from the shadows, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. Clothes from another era, knickers, pinafores, hair slicked back with pomade. Sleep didn't come. Instead, dreams, flames licking wallpaper printed with reindeer, a Christmas tree toppling in slow motion, 5 shapes huddled in an upstairs room, hands clasped, waiting for rescue that never came. But in the dream, they weren't burning, they were pulled. Shadows with 2 long arms, coiling from the floorboards like smoke given form, wrapping around tiny wrists, dragging them down into the dark below the house. Not out the door, not through the windows, under. Into spaces where fire couldn't touch, where time bent and bones never charred. I woke, gasping, the room reeking of smoke. Jake was already up, staring at his phone. "Look at this," he said, voice hollow. He'd searched again, deeper into the archives. George Sodder had spent his life chasing leads, sightings of his kids grown into strangers, a photo in a Charleston newspaper of a young man who looked just like Maurice, down to the cowlick. Jenny hung a wreath on the gatepost every Christmas, inscribed with their names, until she died in '84. The official report called it an accident. Faulty wiring, a blaze that hit 1,500 degrees, hot enough to vaporize bone. But the whispers persisted. Locals avoided the lot, called it cursed. And now, in the glow of Jake's screen, a forum post from last week. Saw lights last night near Sodder Place, heard kids singing Silent Night, felt hands on my ankles cold as ice. Trespassing? Yeah. Worth it? Hell no. We never went back. Jake sold his bolt cutters. I threw out my flashlight, but the pull lingered, a hook in the gut. 2 years later, Jake vanished for real. Not in fire, but in the mundane horror of a hiking accident in the Smokies. Searchers found his pack, his phone with one last photo, a tree line dotted with 5 lights. No body, no remains. Me? I drive past that bend on Route 19 sometimes, when work takes me through Fayetteville. Slow down, glance at the fence, still sagging, still silent. But at night, in the quiet hours, I smell it. Caramel and char. Hear the creak of unseen boards, the patter of small feet on concrete that shouldn't hold weight, and the whisper, always the whisper, "Come back. We weren't taken. We were kept." Because here's the truth they don't put in history books. The fire didn't steal the Sodder children. It woke something older, hungrier, that lives in the foundations of homes built on forgotten ground. It doesn't burn. It burrows, and it waits for trespassers, for those foolish enough to listen, to step across the line and into the echo. Last Christmas, I hung a wreath on my own door, just in case, but the initials I carved into the wood weren't mine. They were MS 1945, and every night since, the lights flicker at my window, 5 of them, bobbing closer, waiting for me to play.